Okay, cool. Hello, and welcome to the first ever Flake Finders Friday with myself, Robert Kielty and Dan Mangum. How you doing, Dan?
Doing pretty good, Rob. How are you?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. Excited to go through, decided to go through this today. We have, so what we're going to do on this live stream is we are going to go through an issue that we've, can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds good.
I've just realized that I'm actually watching this stream, so I'm seeing myself slightly delayed. I'm just gonna fix that. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I was wondering who's interrupting me, and it was me. Okay, so let's start over again. So my name is Robert Kielty. I have worked as a CI Signal team lead and as a CI Signal shadow, and as has Dan. What we do on CI Signal for the Kubernetes project is we actively monitor the state of CI as we go through a release cycle for Kubernetes. And in doing that work, there's a lot to learn in relation to how CI works in Kubernetes and how the testing framework works, and indeed how Kubernetes works. So this live stream is, we're planning to do this once a month over the coming year. And it was born out of two previous videos and two previous live streams, one from Jordan Liggett, who described some principles on how to deal with and how to troubleshoot and how to fix tests that flake on the Kubernetes project. And then myself and Dan, before Christmas at the online contributor experience for 2020, we did a tour of CI. And in doing both of those talks, what motivated us to do this talk was that it's great to get nuggets of information in relation to principles and how to deal with test maintenance and how to fix test maintenance related problems. But it usually leaves you hungry for more to see how those principles are applied and what we're going to do in this live stream is basically go through issues that happened over the previous 4 weeks and how we figured out a specific issue and the whole process of doing triage, root cause analysis, figuring out the fixes. And so I think, yeah, that's the raison d'etre for this live stream. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Dan, before we kick off?
No, not really. That was a great intro. One of the things that I did want to add was we were talking yesterday, and Rob and I have done quite a bit of kind of flake hunting and fixing failures and that sort of thing. But we're always continuously learning. And one of the things we want to do with this stream is definitely encourage folks who are in the chat or who want to reach out afterwards in Slack or something like that to definitely feel free to reach out to us. There are no stupid questions, and if there were, we would ask them all on the stream. So we'll definitely be learning alongside folks. The Kubernetes code base is constantly evolving, so there's always new stuff to be found.
Absolutely. So I think I'm just trying to think. So should we just head into the issue that we're going to look at here? We have a link to a HackMD that I think I shared on Twitter. So I'm at Rob Kielty on Twitter if you want to pick that up. And I'm trying to think what the best way to share that with the audience is.
Yeah, you could just drop it in the YouTube chat if you want. It looks like a few folks are in there.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here to get this set up. Nice.
Excellent. So I can see that. Dan. So yeah. So should we let's just hop in straight into it. I'll mute myself and see if I can drop links into the chat, and I might chat with Jeff, who's supporting us on this. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, let's go ahead.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. So today we're going to be looking at an issue that came up actually this past week, and it's specifically related to some of the work that I do as a SIG release tech lead and a release manager. And I think it's really interesting because it touches a number of different areas of the Kubernetes infrastructure, a number of different teams. So it allows us to kind of explore and connect some different pieces together. So typically, and we want to show this as kind of like the actual process that we go through and that other folks go through when they get pinged on something flaking or failing. But typically, the CI signal team, which is a release cycle team, right? So every release cycle, there's new CI signal team members, and there's a team lead and shadows. They are responsible for monitoring the test grid dashboard. So test grid is basically where we have a view of all of the different jobs that are running. So each job is made up of different tests. This is not a great example because there's only one test running, which is building Kubernetes. But maybe we'll look at this SKU cluster latest, and you'll see all of these tests. And these are coming from the Kubernetes code base. And through this stream and some other ones, we'll definitely talk about how these get selected and how these dashboards get created and that sort of thing. And definitely feel free to ask questions in the chat if you want to know specific things. So like I said, we're specifically looking at a build job, right? So things that jobs that build Kubernetes and then push up the artifacts for folks to be able to consume. And these are CI build jobs, right? So these are incremental builds, not major releases or something like that. So the first two that you'll notice are build master and build master fast. These are kind of our two primary build jobs. But then over on our informing board here, we also have this build master canary. And this is going to be the subject of our stream today. And it's going to talk about kind of some of the work that's been happening over the last year or so, or maybe a little longer. And it's also going to touch on how the release tooling connects to the test infrastructure, connects to the Kubernetes code base, and more. So it's going to be a fun one. I also see a bunch of folks who are in SIG release in the chat. I wanted to welcome all y'all and everyone else as well. We appreciate y'all tuning in. It's exciting to see folks here. And Rob, definitely feel free to jump in here and interrupt me as you see fit, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah.
Cool.
I can represent the audience and ask questions if needs be.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, right, is look at the issue that we were tagged in on. So Joyce opened this issue, and Joyce is the CI signal lead for the 1.21 cycle. And they are awesome, and they are very active at opening issues. And this one was opened pretty quickly after this job started failing, actually. Difference between failing and flaking would be failing is consistent failures on continuous jobs. Flaking would be sometimes failing, sometimes passing. So this is a failing test, and Joyce has denoted it as such. And you'll see that Joyce went in and got us some information about what was happening from the build logs, linked to the issue, and gave also some helpful context, right, for us to be able to troubleshoot this, and for anyone else who came along and wanted to help out with fixing this to do that. So the CI signal team is really great in that regard, and this is an awesome demonstration of that right here. So this is labeled with SIG release. So we know kind of the area in which this is happening, and it's SIG release because it's a build job, right? And so we were able to troubleshoot this and kind of triage it between SIG release members. And Joyce actually did another great thing here and pinged us directly in Slack and said, hey, this is failing. Release managers, can you take a look at this? Which is how Sasha and I showed up here. And we had some additional context around some changes that were recently made that could have happened. So you'll see this kind of triaging here where we assigned ourselves and said, we'll take a look at this. All right. So we already took a look at that job that was running. And to understand what the purpose of this job is, it's important to understand some context around some changes that have been made with release engineering over the past year or so, as I mentioned earlier. Basically, we used to have in the K-release repo quite a few bash scripts. And one of them, a very large one called Inago, was used to do a lot of the release machinery. And that's actually been replaced, and other operations have been replaced as well by a tool called Krell. So K-release, right? Krell. And it's a lot easier to maintain because it's an actual binary that's built, and it's not just bash scripts that can be kind of hard to troubleshoot, and can run differently in different environments and that sort of thing. So there's some great work specifically led by Sasha, who I see is in the chat today, to replace some of that. Likewise, there's also this push build script, which does a lot of the operations around building Kubernetes. And it is kind of getting replaced, or a lot of parts of it have been replaced as well, in the CREL release tool. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So there's also the test infra repo, which, if you're familiar with Kubernetes test infrastructure, you've probably been here before. This is where we configure all of the dashboards to say what tests should run, what jobs should be present on what dashboards, etc. All of this is a result of the artifacts that are in test infra. There's also some different tooling as well as images that run jobs, and kind of specify how things can be invoked. All right. So once again, let's get back to the actual issue at hand here. There was an error showing up in the build job. And let's actually go, well, actually Joyce gave us a great link here, with a Spyglass example failure here, which Spyglass is kind of, which you'll frequently hear, and we mentioned this actually in the Contribex talk, I remember. You'll hear Spyglass referred to as prow. You'll hear everything referred to as prow. You can refer to me as prow. It doesn't matter. Everything becomes prow, but this is actually called Spyglass, and there's a number of different tools. And Rob's probably actually better at picking out all the different tools that you can use to troubleshoot things. Frequently, when I'm going through how I've done things, Rob gives me a little more insight on how I could have done it better.
So the way I describe this is that Spyglass, Prow is the job runner, and what Prow does is it launches the CI jobs for Kubernetes, and what we're looking at here on this page is called Spyglass. But the only weird thing about this being called Spyglass, and the reason that not a lot of people know this, is there's no reference to Spyglass on the UI. But Spyglass is the component that renders this UI for us. And I suppose one of my Spyglass tips is to click on all of the things. So there's all of the information is present here. So there's a lot of links at the top. Artifacts point to all of the job run artifacts that are created when a CI job is run, and that's and then a lot of those artifacts are bubbled up into this view that we see here. The other sort of top tip I have for this tool is that if you hover over one of the line numbers on the left-hand side, you can actually get a link to that line number. So that makes an individual log line shareable when you're logging an issue. And that's a really useful feature that you kind of have to hunt around and discover. And then the final thing about Spyglass is there's a lot of runtime information at the very bottom of the page in relation to the containers and the pods that were spun up in order to run the job in question. And from a troubleshooting point of view, all of that information at the bottom is useful too.
Absolutely. I actually did not know that you could link directly to the line numbers. So I just learned that today, and that is super helpful. And I need to apologize to everyone who I've shared this view with a snippet pulled out of it that they had to Control F to find. So thank you for that, Rob.
It's subtle. Yeah, it's subtle. Just click on the number, and then click on the number, and then on the address bar, you will see a hash, a reference within that view.
Absolutely.
You can share that.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's super cool. So this is looking at one of those failures that was happening, and as I mentioned, Joyce had already put in here kind of a little snippet here that said unknown flag platform, and then showed the output here. And if we actually go down to the bottom, we should see previous Docker build failed, and that caused the job to fail, and then it just cleans up from there, and our artifacts were not getting released. So hopping back over here, I did want to take a moment to compare this to what was here before. So two things kind of happened in tandem to caused this to be kind of a complicated thing to troubleshoot. One of them was the actual dashboard configuration was changed, and one of them was the code path that was getting executed, which in this case is just a build, but a code path nonetheless was also changed around the same time. So I want to look at, let me see if I can find this test infra issue or this PR. All right. So as I mentioned, we've tried to move from bash things or complicated hacky things to more standardized tooling. And that's no offense to anyone who has worked on some of those hacky things, because they've gotten us to where we're at today, right? And it's a joint effort where people are aligned and moving forward with new tooling. But this is where we moved this Krell job into the build canary job. So if we look at what actually changed here, we used to have a different build canary, and it was using the bootstrap script, which if you look in any of the, where's a good example of this? Probably actually just the main build job, I believe, uses it. If you look in any of these jobs, there's going to be a big disclaimer at the top where it says, that is not what I want. Hold on one second. It's going to say at the top, please do not use bootstrap.py. And we all ignore that and continue using it. So don't be like us. Bootstrap.py is deprecated. We do not support it. It's building Kubernetes though, right? So it is implicitly supported, unfortunately. But please do not use it with jobs going forward. And so what we want to do is move off using things like bootstrap.py. And so we had a canary job, which the reason for this build canary is another effort. So keep track of all these different efforts that are happening simultaneously, but to move from Google owned infrastructure to Kubernetes community owned infrastructure. So Google is very generous in contributing compute resources to Kubernetes to be able to run all of these different jobs. But it places a lot of burden on folks at Google to be able to maintain these things and to have to fix everything when something comes up, right? And we don't want that. We want it to be a general thing that community members can help maintain. So we're trying to move off using Google infrastructure to moving to Kubernetes community infrastructure. And that's what the purpose of this build canary was, which is different from build master here, which is this, did I have this up over here? Let's see. Build master should be using something like Kubernetes CI images, which is the old Kubernetes project. And then the newer one here is likely using something like Kate staging CI images, right? So we're moving over to new infrastructure to make it more maintainable from a Kubernetes community perspective. So there's that aspect of it, and then there's also the, I'm losing my tabs now, but so there's that aspect of it, which that's what the bootstrap job was serving its purpose of. And then there's also moving off the bash, right? So this is a bootstrap job that was pushing to the new infrastructure. This was a Krell job that was pushing to the new infrastructure. And what we're doing here with this PR is we're making the Krell job the canary job. So we're eliminating that bootstrap job. We're saying this Krell job has been running really well. It's handling pushing the CI images to the new infrastructure. So we're going to drop this bootstrap job and replace it with the Krell job. So that was a really great thing, and we are excited to do that. You'll actually see noted in here that the no bootstrap job, which is the Krell job, has been running successfully, but there was also some recent failures, which we didn't think was an issue at this time, but it turned out around the same time as this change was being made. Let's see if I can find the PR up here. We switched to using BuildX for all of our image builds. And I have some links down here to some articles about what BuildX is, what BuildKit is, how it interacts with your typical Docker experience, et cetera. We're not going to go too deep into it today. But essentially, it makes it a lot easier to be able to build multi-architecture images. So Sasha has been very instrumental in leading us towards this. So this PR here actually updated us to using BuildX, which you'll see we are actually using BuildX for some alternative architectures here, but this switches to using it for everything. And so we switched over, and what happened was the Krell job started failing, and then we promoted it to the Canary job, which made this a little bit difficult to troubleshoot, because one of the things that Rob and I would probably like to improve about Test Grid is you only get, what you're presented with right now. So this build master canary was doing one thing and then it was updated, but all we see is one continuous run, right, of the same job. And maybe, we could do things like, use a different name or something like that. But what you'll actually see if we go back in the failures is that some of the failures, which we had quite a few here, were initially still running the bootstrap.py, I believe. Well, actually, we had some failures that were related to infrastructure things, which this is another good thing that Rob pointed out earlier. These are running in pods in a Kubernetes cluster, so you can have issues with the infrastructure itself. But anyway, so this started failing and then was promoted. So then the build master canary starts failing. And this manifested in some interesting ways, which we can show an example of. Let me actually just pull over this Slack conversation here. So the kubeadmin folks pinged us because they use what's called a version marker. So this is pretty common with CI systems, right? When you build a new version, we want to, put whatever the latest is so that folks know what version to pull down and use if they want the latest CI build. So if we look at this right here, it's just showing the version of the latest build. So that what the issue that was happening was this version marker was getting updated, but the CI images were not available because our job was failing, right? And kubeadmin, like very good Kubernetes citizens, have already changed over to consuming the community infrastructure, right? So these images and artifacts were available on the Google-owned infrastructure because that's what our build master was doing. But because our canary job started failing, the version marker no longer had artifacts that were present on the new infrastructure, which kubeadmin is rightly switched over to consuming. So that's an example of how this affected users, even though it was kind of like intermittent builds, right? These are not actual releases. And I actually just saw a question pop up in here. Do the Canary CI workflows run on PRs also, or how can we validate that the fix works? So we're going to look at a couple different ways how we troubleshooted this. The canaries do not run on PRs, right? Because you wouldn't be publishing pre-submits essentially, which are tests that run on a PR before it's merged. But we can talk a little bit later about what does run on pre-submits to help validate some of these things. All right, so that was promoted. It was failing, and it was confusing, right? Because actually, the Krell job and the build master job, which is using Bootstrap still, one of them was passing, the build master one, and the Krell one was not. And they're running the same exact commands. Basically, even though they have kind of different infrastructure around them, they all end up running in the Kubernetes repo. Essentially, well, actually, we can just look at that PR from Sasha. They all end up running kind of the same commands, right? But the image it runs in, as well as some of the setup that happens beforehand, is different. So if we look at the output of the logs, let's see, this is a Krell job here. We can actually take a look at the, actually, let's look at the Prow job. And we can see that the image we're using is Kate Staging RelEng, which stands for Release Engineering, Kate CI Builder. This is an image that we build in the Kubernetes release repo. And that's going to be under images here. And if we go into Release Eng, Kate CI Builder, this is kind of the files that we use to construct this image. And then the Bootstrap jobs, which let's see if I can find where I have that open. Let's see if this is one of them. No, that's also a Kielty CI release builder. Let's go back to this one. And check if we can see. Right. So here we have Kielty test images bootstrap. And that is built from the test infra repo under images. Here we go. And if you look at Bootstrap, we're not going to get into all the different things that get set up here, but basically these different images set up the ability to run Docker in Docker, right? So we need Docker present to be able to build these images and push them, but we're running within a Docker container as well, right? The difference here is that one of them was failing and one of them wasn't, right? And they're running the exact same command. So how could that be? Well, the most likely situation is that we have different versions of Docker running, right? Our environment has to be different somehow. So that specific flag with the -- platform not being recognized, that has to do with how BuildX works. And we can actually take these different images, right? And we can run them locally and kind of see what's inside of them. There's other ways to troubleshoot as well. I particularly like this because it allows me to play around in it a little bit. So this is the Bootstrap image that I mentioned, and I'm going to run this locally. And let's just check out kind of what's inside of here. All right, so we're inside, and let's see what Docker version we have. All right, we have Docker version 20.10.2. All right, let's now take a look at the CI builder image and check what's inside of there. Docker version. All right, we have 19.03.13. So obviously an older version, right? So right away we could start to see that there might be some issues. And I'll go ahead and show you that if we try to run BuildX here, and it doesn't really matter what platform we use because we're not actually going to run this, so it's not a real platform. But we're going to see the same exact issue that we're seeing in the jobs, right? We're seeing this unknown flag platform, which to me, this is a bit of a uninformative error because what's really happening here is it's not recognizing BuildX, but the main error it's giving us is that it doesn't recognize this platform flag. If we actually ran it without platform, I think Docker BuildX, yeah, BuildX is not a Docker command. So that would have been maybe a little more helpful. But essentially, BuildX is a newer part of the Docker CLI. It's basically a different engine that you can use. And so we don't have that enabled by default. And how you can enable that by default, or not by default, but how you can enable that is by setting Docker CLI experimental to enabled. And let's see here if we actually have that set. And if you're watching from home, you're probably like, no, Dan, we obviously don't have that set or else this would be working. And you're right, we don't. And in the other Docker version, right, Docker CLI is no, or BuildX is no longer experimental. So it was working by default. So when we went ahead and switched over to using BuildX in one environment, it was saying, okay, I recognize BuildX and platform and all the things that go with it. And so that's going to work. And in this other one, it's not. So there's a number of different solutions we could have from that. And I kind of enumerated them here, and I'm sure there's other options as well. But the first that would kind of come to mind is like, oh, okay, we need to update our Docker version in Kielty CI builder. So that would solve the problem, you would think. We could also just make sure in that Kielty CI builder environment that Docker CLI experimental enabled is set. And that would also solve the issue. And then the last thing, and this is what we actually ended up doing, is setting Docker CLI experimental enabled in the actual command that is run. And so this is the PR for that. And basically just in that image building and in the conformance image building, we're just setting this before we actually run the command. And why this was viewed as the optimal short-term solution, at least, is because we'd like for these scripts to work for as many people as possible, right? And if folks are still using, older versions of Docker, we would like for this to work out of the box. And there's some BuildX setup that I'm not going into that could also make this complicated. But this was the kind of the best solution for the greatest number of community members. And it was a short-term fix, right? So we could get that in. We actually didn't have to build new images or anything like that. So that was nice. And we thought, all right, good. We solved the problem. We are great Kubernetes superheroes now. Unfortunately, we did not solve the problem. We got to a new problem, which is progress. And if you do any of the flake troubleshooting or failing test troubleshooting, you'll start to appreciate more of getting a new failure. But let's look at a later failure, particularly the one right before it flipped to passing, and see what we're getting now inside of here. All right, so we're building all of our Go targets. Okay, so that looks good. Before, what was happening is we were having an issue with Docker build. Okay, it looks like that our Docker builds are running here, at least some of them. And this is kind of the output you get when you're running BuildX. But we see that there are some issues here with quiet currently not implemented. That kind of just sounds like a warning to me. But could be something. Sasha noticed it as well. And Sasha said, we can clean that up. And also we want the build logs to be verbose if possible. So while Sasha was kind of working on this, I was taking a look and trying to fix it. And we were like, oh, this will probably help, right? We're going to get more verbose build logs here. Maybe Dan will be able to fix it and we'll be able to move forward. But we didn't really think this would have a big impact on it. So this got merged. And this was a few days later. As you can see, there's lots of failures. And all of a sudden it turned green. And at this point, I was pleased, or we were pleased, but but we didn't know why, right? And that's an issue as well. That's almost as bad as something not working, right? Not knowing why it is working. But if we hop over here and take a look at a successful run, we can see that the quiet currently not implemented is no longer present there, right? And what was happening was, and once again, I want to reiterate that, so we added the Docker CLI experimental, which should have solved the difference between the Bootstrap image and the Kielty CI builder image, but it still had, they both had the quiet flag, right? So why was the build master job still passing? Well, I ran this locally with my own Docker installed, which I believe I have 1903 probably, which a lot of folks are still using. And I also got the error. So let's just try that with Docker BuildX build. There's nothing actually here, but quiet currently not implemented. And you see it didn't even try to build. And if I look at what the output is, we get exit 1, right? So that is causing an issue because in our release script over here, and actually I'll do this in the terminal because Rob gave me some good feedback about that it's a little bit easier to follow in an editor. So I'll try to do that. And if folks viewing also have more feedback around, how this can be easier to follow along, definitely give us that feedback as well. But basically, this is the script that Sasha was modifying, right, with the BuildX commands. And then I later added the CLI experimental flag. And so let's take a look at this. And let's see, we were searching for Docker. Let's find where the Docker BuildX.
You search for the -q.
That's true. I should have done that, but yeah. I am here now. So
okay, cool.
Right. Like I said earlier, Rob always does things the most efficient way, and I do them the painful way. But anyway, right. So we have this -q here present, and they're both executing it, right? So why is one of them passing and one of them failing? And we'll also notice that if we go down a bit further, These are all executing in parallel, which is why we're seeing some successful outputs. And so this wait for jobs, though, is waiting for all of those Docker builds to finish up and make sure they all exited with 0 status code. And so some of them, it appears, are running, and specifically, actually, the conformance image was running because we didn't have the quiet flag on there. But the other ones are failing, which is why we are seeing that. And the reason for that, which I'm going to go ahead and jump back in these images again to show the difference, is that BuildX itself is versioned differently than Docker is. And so let's once again look at the Bootstrap image here. And we can say Docker BuildX version. And it looks like we have v0.5.1. And if we look in the Kielty CI builder image, we can see, well, actually, I'm going to need the Docker CLI experimental to even recognize BuildX. Enabled Docker BuildX version. All right, so we see that we also have an older version of Docker BuildX in this image. And I think I actually did this prior to doing this little exercise. Wanted to search for the issue and see if we could find where anyone else was seeing this quiet not implemented. And here is the PR to BuildX that replaces the error generated by quiet option with a warning. And if we go and take a look at this actual commit, we're going to see the helpful GitHub hint that this was included in v0.5.1. And if we look back at these images, we're going to see that we were running 0.5.1 in the Bootstrap job. So it was just warning about that quiet flag. And in the Kielty CI builder job, we were actually erroring on that, which was causing our job to fail, was causing folks to not be able to consume from the new community infrastructure. And actually, the way I think that we ended up catching this was that Sasha had a newer version of BuildX on his local machine. So it was actually kind of happenstance that it was caught. But we were chatting about it in Slack, and that's how we got to it. All right, so
there's a kind of there's a kind of a whole inception vibe, as is often the case in container runtime stacks. I suppose if you were coming to this cold, this would be quite intimidating. Be fair to say.
Or if you're not coming
one
to
of the
a cold.
things that or even if you're not coming to a cold, but in terms of scaling, the wall, it's not a learning curve. It is a climbing wall with an overhang and a couple of holes taken out. It can seem like that, but it's important to note that that as a team and as a community, that there's a lot of leaning on each other in terms of getting to the root cause of these issues. It would be fair to say, I think.
Absolutely. And lots of that happens in the Slack channel, so it can be really helpful just to jump in there and ask questions and that sort of thing. I know when I was looking through this failure here, I was asking Steven questions, I was asking Ben questions, and they were all providing really helpful context, including looking at how we enabled BuildX in K-release, which is with a script that we actually borrowed from Kind, which obviously Ben does a lot of work on. But we have this init BuildX script, which helped me be able to identify how we are actually setting up the virtualization, to be able to build for these different platforms. Another thing I wanted to note,
go ahead. You go first. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've got a little bit of a delay here.
You go ahead.
Cool. But yeah, I'll go ahead and note this real quickly. But one of the things that happened in the meantime is Steven noticed that those KubeADM folks were having trouble consuming the latest. So he went in and went ahead and re-enabled that that bootstrap job, and just named it build Kate's infra. And this allowed us to get those images available again, right, until we could determine what the issue was and provide a fix. And then after that, we just reverted it. And that's why we only have the build canary now.
Mm. So one of the things I was going to say, Dan, just if you're coming to this completely cold, that Kubernetes as an application resides in the Kubernetes/Kubernetes repo on GitHub. We have a separate we have a separate repo called test infra, and that contains all of the tooling that supports and underpins CI in the Kubernetes project. And then as a separate, as another repo, we have SIG release, and a lot of the tooling that we've been talking about today is resides there and is tracked there, and that tooling is used to, I suppose, build Kubernetes releases to be released to the public. And one of the, if you're coming to the project anew, one of the things that you kind of have to sort of feel your way around and learn is what repos do what, and we've a couple of links at the bottom of the show notes to provide some signposting into that whole world.
Absolutely. So yeah, that is most of the failure we actually wanted to show today. I don't see any major questions here that I don't think that we haven't covered in the chat. But I know we've been going for 40 minutes. We have about 10 more minutes that we could fill here. Rob, was there anything you wanted to specifically look deeper into that I was walking through there?
I'm trying to think. Like, I mean, I think for somebody to go through it, all those links are there. The main thing I just want to reiterate is that everybody doesn't know everything, and that if you keep on asking questions and tackling issues and ask those questions in the Slack channels, that you'll get the support you need, and any contribution that you want to make will be welcome. We're always looking for more people to work on CI Signal, and the project really does need more people to get into this and get into test maintenance. It is challenging, but there's a big community there of people who can help you out with this work, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said.
Mm.
Well, I think we can wrap it up a little bit early today. Definitely, this was our first stream, right? So we're learning what's helpful for folks, just as y'all are learning alongside us about Kubernetes infrastructure. So we are very open to feedback and hearing about how this can be more effective for folks, and how you can best utilize this information. We are talking about where this should live. I think the last thing we mentioned was somewhere in the SIG release repo, for folks to be able to kind of like go through and run some of these commands themselves and get familiar with the different test infrastructure. But yeah, please let us know what's helpful and what's not.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Dan. Like, I mean, that is a proper deep dive. I think if we do this once a month, we should all learn lots of stuff. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely, and maybe even more than once a month, right? I think we were talking that there's plenty of failures and flakes to fill lots of hours of content.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right.
Cool.
Well, Jeff, I assume that you'll sign us off here. But yeah, everyone have a good weekend, and thanks for tuning in today.
Bye-bye.